Okay. Just describe your job to start with.
My name is
Yeah.
Siggins. I'm the policy lead, joint policy lead for carers for the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. I oversee, in the borough that I work, I oversee adult social care.
In terms of the government's whole family approach, you're working in adult social services. How does that work with children's services? Because after all, the majority of situations, presumably it's a family involving parents and children.
Yeah. What the Care Act and the Children and Families Act brings is a responsibility for councils to actually deliver a comprehensive service for adults and children in the way that the council sees fit. So in terms of what that looks like in practice, a recognition when adult social workers go and assess an individual, being young carer aware, asking the appropriate questions, understanding the whole family dynamic and the family environment is essential and important, and something that we've not always done in the past. So we welcome that opportunity for those two pieces of legislation to come together to have a more robust, comprehensive approach.
Would it be better, perhaps, if there weren't adult social workers or children's social workers, there were just family social workers to recognise what the government wants as this whole family approach?
I think in practice that's a useful insight to sort of to consider and reflect on. What we do have though in practice is people who become very experienced in, for example, child protection or working with children in need, and may not have spent much of their working life actually working with an adult environment. The majority of the work of an adult social worker is working with older people on the health interface, supporting people to get out of hospital, to remain independent in the community, choice and control, live their lives as they want. So in theory, somebody having a significant amount of knowledge of adults and children's social work and the issues is important, and something that we do need to consider in terms of training and development for social workers, especially as the reflection of the Act and what it feels like, for example, for young carers, is that often young carers haven't been recognised as part of what is now a Care Act assessment.
So are the two adjustments of professional mindset, therefore, that with an adult social worker or adult services, the recognition that, oh, there's a child in this family, and with children's services, is it more about remembering that they're adults? Is it like the sort of two bits of a jigsaw?
Yeah, I think that's an important reflection to make. In terms of, so when social workers go out, we would expect there to be a whole family approach to the assessment, to understand the needs of the individual, the impact on any members of the family that exist, and then thinking about how that comprehensive whole family approach to that assessment can actually take place. So understanding from the family environment how much of that care and support is being provided by young carers, and to look at replacement care for the cared for person to reduce the burden of care on the young carer. So then from a children's perspective, if children's are focusing primarily on a child in need, mum might have a significant level of impairment, it's actually understanding the issues about that level of impairments having on that individual and bringing in the adult social worker to actually undertake the Care Act compliant assessment in areas where they're not combined.
What young carers what young carers repeatedly tell us is that they're essentially afraid of social services because they think they're going to get taken away from the family. The family's going to get broken up. To the extent that in some examples we've been given, the social worker arrives and everybody in the family is on their best behaviour. So the social worker isn't seeing the reality, and then reality kicks in as soon as the social worker leaves. How do you make that situation, those assessments, more realistic, allowing for that sort of effect?
I mean, again, we hear that a lot, especially with older people who are struggling to cope in their own homes, and social services go in and they automatically think that the person's going to be admitted to a residential or nursing home. So again, people trying to present in a way that isn't necessarily reflective of their needs. And there is something about a conversation and dialogue and establishing a relationship of trust in that environment that you're in, not just going in with your assessment form to complete And I think it's about the skill of the social worker in actually trying to understand and engage with that family, to try to understand, develop a rapport, understand what is really going on. And it might be over a number of visits, and it might be by triangulating information, but I think it's about the skill of the social worker in actually trying to establish that, so they get a real reflection of what's actually going on in that family.
So is that, in terms of what young carers tell us, is that social workers becoming more seen as human beings and not simply instruments of the local authority, if I can put it in that sort of way?
I do think it is. It's about the skill of the social worker and being able to have conversations. And I actually argue that that is what we should all be actually doing when we go into somebody's home. We recognise that we're actually going into somebody's home environment. We've been invited into that home environment, being clear about why we're there, trying to understand from the family, to be able to listen, so to actually engage effectively. And you do hear stories where social workers go in with forms in front of them just to actually complete boxes, and actually without trying to establish what is really going on, for the family to talk through what is going on day to day and just to understand what those dynamics look and feel like. So I always advocate the conversation and completing the form as part of that, but actually saying what the purpose of the form is, being clear about the purpose of the visit, the information we're trying to glean, what the next steps are going to be, how social workers or social care might aim to support an individual, and it's just to talk people through those steps so they're not worrying about, well, what's next and why are you here? So it is actually part of the skill of the social worker in putting the family and the individuals at ease and being clear about what they're going to be doing next and sticking to that. Often we still hear situations where social workers then don't get back to people, don't give them copies of assessments, aren't probably engaged in a support plan, and it is almost like a test. So I think it is about engaging with the spirit, I would argue, of the Care Act, and to actually really get to understand from a support and resilience perspective how we can support that family, and it is in the skill of the social worker.
So what would you say to those local authorities who may be watching this programme and thinking, actually, you know what, we're not doing that? How can they go about changing what may be an entrenched culture?
I think first it's actually understanding the experience of people who are using services, so to get a baseline, because the social workers might think that they're operating entirely appropriately, they're meeting all their performance targets, but actually what does it feel like for individuals? Do individuals and their families feel more supported? So I would actually argue that we need to find out, not just on the annual survey, but to actually understand what that experience of care and support from what I would say our customers looks and feels like, to get a baseline. So we might think, or authorities might think, they're doing a good job, but what does it look and feel like for individuals, and getting the user feedback. The other part we can do is actually about co-production, engaging more in co-production, getting individuals who use services in the recruitment of staff, looking at more about the social values and what that looks and feels like when they're appointing staff. So with things like that we can actually engage in, but it's important to understand what people's experiences are versus what social workers think it is.
In the comments that we've received from young carers through several years of programming and ourselves at Carers World Radio, to us it appears both acts came into force last year. We're now 12 months on and nothing appears to have happened. We're still hearing the same consistent stories from young carers about effectively being, in the words of the Carers Trust Report, invisible and in distress.
So I would suggest that local authorities, we didn't have a huge amount of time to implement both acts. So there are certain things in the acts that we need to have in place. So most authorities would have done a Care Act and Children and Families Act preparedness to make sure they had the building blocks in place. Some of that might have been engaging social workers, but again, the spirit of the two acts, and are we actually putting that in place? So I think we always expected there to be an ongoing development process with social workers, but with the feedback from individuals and looking at how we have to change and amend, sort of reviewing post the legal framework, how does it feel, what does it feel like for people, what does it feel like for social workers, and actually determine, how far have we progressed, not just in implementing the nuts and bolts of the acts, but actually the spirit of the acts in terms of what it's supposed to have been, enable people to have experienced.
Wouldn't the spirit of the act simply be the day after both came into force, you get all your staff together and you say, look, no matter how you've done, whether good or bad in the past, from now, you've got to be human beings when you go into those situations. You don't have to wait for systems, you don't have to wait for forms. You can do it straight away, can't you? And in a year make a difference.
I would suggest yes, but again, for some people who have been doing quick assessments in and out and may not have been highly skilled, because obviously there's a range of skills within the social care workforce, so may have people who could do that, and that has happened in a number of areas, but there will still be people who may not have adopted the spirit of the Act in terms of choice control, the individuals being the centre of the assessment, and for them to be supported to come up with the outcomes that they want. So I would say there'd be an ongoing development need, and this is why it's important to get the feedback and what's the role of the social work professional practice, etc., in actually improving that on the ground.
Okay, thank you.